Our next guest is Caterina Politi. She has a story to tell that is one that any one of us could find ourselves in. It is heartbreaking and it is tragic. And she comes on today to tell it not for any other reason really than to raise awareness about the danger and to plead with parents and young men to be aware of that danger. She also comes on to highlight an egregious lack of justice in our legal systems and legal communities, and in her instance in Victoria. It is the story about her son, David.
David was my son, and I couldn't have wished for a more beautiful son.
It was never ever like a dull moment with him. I was just that lucky girl that got to call him my boyfriend.
He was my best friend.
He was the best bloke that anyone has ever really met.
He'd always find a way to make me laugh, like squeeze me really tight around my stomach.
He was loyal. He always included everyone.
On New Year's Eve in 2012 in Victoria, 22-year-old David Cassai died after he fell and hit his head on the concrete pavement when he was attacked by a 20-year-old man at Rye, Dylan Closter. This week, after only serving 6 years for manslaughter, Closter walked free. Caterina, welcome to Outsiders. This has been a wretched week for you, Caterina, and you're very brave to come on and relive yet again the pain around your son's dreadful death, but you are keen for people to hear the story. We played a bit of the David Cassai story earlier. People can find it on YouTube, and I urge them to watch it. He was obviously, Caterina, I don't need to tell you, an amazing young man. Tell us about the night he died.
Every parent's nightmare to get that news that something had happened to David. And that's when our world was turned upside down. His life was taken so prematurely and so aggressively that night for no reason at all. And that will haunt me and my family for the rest of our lives, and not only my family, the other victims that were there that night. And it's just like a dominoes effect of so many people who were affected.
Tell us what actually happened.
David was out celebrating one of his best friend's birthdays. They left the Portsea Hotel, got on the bus to get down to Rosebud. Unfortunately, the bus didn't go that far. They even asked the bus driver if he could take them that little bit further if they paid him a bit extra, but unfortunately that couldn't happen. They got off at Rye, crossed over along the shop side, and it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning, just after midnight. It had ticked over to New Year's Eve. It was a chilly summer's night, and Closter crossed the road and hip and shouldered David for no reason. It was an empty night. It was 1 o'clock in the morning almost, as I said, and hip and shouldered David. And David said, you know, have a sick one, mate, which young people say. And then Closter turned around and shouted out, "Do you want to fight? ... David told him to F off. They kept walking away from him, and then Closter went into a boxing stance and chased David down, attempting to punch David, and he fell to the ground. Got up, then Closter punched two other of the friends that night, and in that moment, Closter's co-accused crossed the road, not to stop Closter, but to help destroy David. And there was other victims, 5 other victims that night. And then Closter chased David down. David was walking backwards in a surrender position, not a threat at all to him. And Closter unleashed an almighty punch that slightly lifted David off the ground. He was unconscious and couldn't break his fall, and that did all the damage. He was revived at the scene by a stranger, a 17-year-old boy, until the paramedics arrived, and they airlifted David to the Alfred Hospital. I knew he was going to be in good hands at the Alfred. We got there, and then the helicopter arrived at 3. That's a haunting noise now, the air ambulance. We waited for a few hours in emergency, and 3 doctors came through that those doors, and I knew it was bad news as soon as I saw them, and they delivered the news that there was really pretty much nothing that they could do.
Rita?
It's just so tragic. You've been an absolute warrior for victims and victims' families. You've really worked so hard to get some sensible sentencing happening and people held accountable for these violent crimes. Tell us what you want to see happen. How can we make the courts hand out sentences for violent offences that are in line with community expectations?
Although we started this for David, in David's name, it's for all victims to stop violence. David's killer got a minimum of 6 years, but we successfully campaigned the Victorian government at the time to introduce a 10-year mandatory minimum for manslaughter. They didn't do that, but they introduced the coward punch manslaughter law, which within 8 months we were really surprised and proud of our achievements, and it became law in 2014. Unfortunately, that law's got some tweaks to be improved. There's some points that are just quite difficult to prove in that sentencing, that the perpetrator is aware that the victim wasn't expecting the punch, and that the victim, moments before they're punched, they're not expecting it. I mean, that's very hard to prove. The doctor that was killed at the Box Hill Hospital, his killer was the first to be sentenced, because with the CCTV cameras, it clearly showed that Dr. Pritzwell wasn't expecting that punch. Without those cameras, that would have been very hard to prove, and his killer might have gotten a 5 or 6 year minimum.
James?
But the Attorney General, Jill Hennessy, is looking at reviewing that law. We've had a review, and it's up to her now to tweak that law. But all manslaughter should be 10 years minimum, the very least. It's how much more dead does someone have to be? Dead's dead. In the olden days, maybe manslaughter was accidental, or there was no malice or intention, or it's changed because there's plea bargaining. As we saw, another killer earlier this year was sentenced, and a very high-profile case, killing his wife. He was on appeal, increased to 10 years minimum. That starts to make an indent into their lives. 6 years is nothing. People waste their time on the dole or just fluffing around for 6 years. And also to know that David's killer was pretty much in a minimum security prison all this time with no barbed wires. And I'm not against...
He was out playing football. Even when he was serving his time, he was allowed out on weekends to play football, wasn't he?
Exactly. That was another stab in the heart to find out the way we did, that he was playing. He had the liberty that he took away from David, and to add insult to injury, where were the correction system at the time ensuring that he wasn't socialising? So at the time, he was still breaking the rules, because you could clearly see in the video that he was socialising after the game, and it was a slap in the face. Rehabilitation, I'm for that. But punishment, is number one. Taking away their liberties, and it's not just for coward punch victims, it's for all victims out in the community that we need to speak. And I never wanted to be this person to be speaking. And I thought years ago, why didn't someone start speaking out when maybe Hooks was killed, or any other? And I thought, if I expected someone or wanted someone to speak out, I have to be that person. But I don't want to do this forever. I want this community to be safe for everyone. It's not only, it's a broader, all violence, street and social violence, family violence. And we can't just react when something bad happens, another death, another assault. We have to be proactive, and it starts at home. And, the messaging has got to be reinforced in the community through the schools, through the government, through the policing, through the media. And if we all do that, if we're all part of that chain, we've got half a chance to be safe. And I've got a grandson now, little David. I want the streets to be safe for him when he's out, and I don't want David's death to be in vain.
James.
I don't think that there's anybody watching this morning who would disagree with your very common sense proposals around minimum sentences. I'm wondering, where is there the resistance coming from to these sorts of proposals? Is it from politicians? Is it from the legal community? Is it from the activist class? Who is the opposition to these, as I say, everybody would agree with, very sensible propositions?
It's in the hands of, at the moment, it's in the hands of the legal, the judges, the magistrates. They're interpreting the law, and it's interpreting, and that I don't understand why it's interpretation, because each judge can, someone can give a higher or lesser sentence, but then it's the previous cases that set the standard. So if everyone gets 5 years for manslaughter, give or take, a year or so, well, that's going to be the benchmark. So someone has to be bold to break that mould, to increase it, to 10 years, like Boris Rostetsky on appeal was sentenced to 10 years for manslaughter. So someone's got to be brave. It's not set in concrete. We can change it. Also, with the government support, they can change it. The government says that it's up to the justice system to impose any punishment, but they can support, our calls. And it's not just me. There's many others in the community that are calling for tougher sentencing. I know it's expensive to house prisoners, but that doesn't give them an excuse to give them only a 6-year minimum, because it's busy, it's expensive. We've got the right to receive the justice for victims, for our loved ones that's no longer here. So I call on them to look at it and change it, and to think that also manslaughter is a Category 2 offence, not a Category 1 offence, like intentionally causing serious injury is a Category 1 offence. I don't understand or fathom that.
That is a...
it's beggars belief but it's in their hands, and someone has to be brave. And years ago, I met with David Galbally, and he told me that due to an appeal, they got armed robbery increased on appeal, and then that sets a new standard. And that's what we need. We need a sentence that befits the crime. And it's not just an assault, it's a death. And as I said, how much more dead does someone have to be?
Caterina Politi, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders, and for You Are That Brave Person. Thank you so much, and all our Outsiders' thoughts are with you and the memory of your wonderful son, David. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.